Hi, I'm Helene Russell, and I'm here with Dr. Alan Boesak. Boesak? Boesak.
That's right.
And he's agreed to speak with us about hope. I'm going to go back and sit over there. So, Dr. Reverend Boesak, I, I know that you've written about hope,
Yeah.
and of course, you've experienced a lot of hollering and a lot of pain and a lot of striving against injustice and other things that cause pain. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit about how you understand Christian hope.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you and your class. I wrote about hope because I had the desire to put down on paper and share with others what I thought had been such a strong presence in my own life. And so I experienced hope in different ways, not so much as a theological or a philosophical concept or a theological construct, but mostly as I was challenged by the very presence of hope, whether I could still believe that such a thing exists in the situations in which I found myself, in the situations in which I was called upon to try to find with others some hope. And so I speak of hope as something that is sort of coming at us out of life, and that's why I speak of hope as 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 coming to us out of woundedness. We can only, I say, speak of hope if we speak of home of woundedness, of admitting to the fragility of life. So hope is not, for me, a war cry. There's nothing triumphalistic about it. It is not an exclamation mark at the end of a proud and brave sentence. It is a comma that leads to, so now what do we do with this hope now that we have discovered her? I also spoke of hope like Augustine does as a mother with children.
Mm-hmm.
So Augustine says hope has two children, uh, and the one is called anger, and the other one is called courage. The anger because of the way things are, because of what is being done to God's people and to God's earth, um, and the courage to get up and do something about it. Now, that means for me that one cannot speak of hope without speaking about her children. So if you say, I have hope, and you do not have the outrage that goes with it because you see injustice and you see oppression and you see greed and you see destruction, and you don't find the courage to do something about it, then you have missed hope. You don't know what it means. And so that's why Augustine helps me there. And so in the life that we are called to do things, um, I have discovered that people want to talk about hope as if it's something innocuous, something ethereal, something sweet, something beautiful, but not something that has to do with anger. And so we cannot talk about the anger that God, or the hope that God gives us, if we do not talk about the outrage that God has, because there is injustice, and we cannot speak about hope as courage for us to do what is necessary, because we cannot connect with a God that calls upon us to stand up and do something about it. And so it is the outrage of God that brings hope. At the same time, it is the love of God for justice that makes you stand up and do something about things. And so hope is something that's very alive for me.
Uh-huh.
It comes out of the woundedness.
Yes.
of ourselves, but primarily out of the woundedness of others, and perhaps also out of the woundedness of God. John Calvin has a beautiful, beautiful way of talking about the woundedness of God. And he says that every act of injustice inflicted upon others, every insult, every bit of damage we do in our power over others, to that other person, every such act is a wound upon God self. And so when we stand up for justice, in hope that we can do something about it, we are declaring ourselves willing to do not something only about the woundedness of others, but we would be healing the woundedness of God. That's a bit of an overwhelming thought for me sometimes when I think about that. But it is also one of the most inspiring things that one could be doing. So here am I trying to do something about justice, and I reach out to someone because I see that they are wounded, but in effect, I am healing the woundedness of God. So you have to think about that a bit.
Yes.
But you have to actually do something to understand finally what that means.
Yes, that's beautiful. That's very inspiring. That reminds me also of process theology. Of course, lots of things remind me of process theology. But Whitehead talks about God as the great companion who understands.
Yeah.
Who feels what we feel and is wounded when we're wounded.
Yeah, and in that book, I talk about. I mean, one of the things that I go back to is actually the myths of the ancient Khoi San people, which is part of my own ancestry in South Africa. Of course, they are now terribly neglected. Their language is just about gone. There may be 1,200 or so people left in Southern Africa who still speak the original languages. Their culture is completely obliterated. Their religion, we are beginning to rediscover bit by bit now. But they talk about their God. So we go up, and I won't mention the name too often because people mustn't get confused because of how do you pronounce that and what did he say. But so we go up is their God, and they call their God this because it means the one with the wounded knee. And they tell the story of how in this battle between good and evil that human beings have to fight, this God found it impossible to sit on the sidelines and join the battle.
Yeah.
But in this battle, for our sake and on our behalf and standing by our side, God got wounded in the knee. For the old Khoi, the ancient Khoi, that was quite significant because it meant, number one, that God is so identifying with us. So if we get wounded in life and we get wounded in the battles of life, and then we must understand as we continue, we're not on our own. Next to us is a God who does not outrun us. It's not a giant that strides the universe with purpose and power. It is a wounded God who limps along with us and who keeps up with us so that we are never left on our own. But it goes deep because for the ancient Khoi, how did they hunt? They had to run after their prey. They didn't have guns and rifles and sights and whatever it is that you can shoot something at 1,000 meters. They had to run until the buck or whatever it is tires out. And so their agility, their ability to run, if you can't do that anymore, you'll die of hunger. So it's their very life or their understanding of life and the substance of life that had to do with their ability to remain alive also has to do with this God. And so their God is very much uh, one who lives with them in fragility, almost a shared
Yeah.
fragility. They don't call upon God as a great power to intervene to change life, but as one who says, if you just walk with us and help us keep up with you, and you keep up with us, that is where they find hope. So um, it's a very powerful thing
Yeah.
theologically to begin to understand, and it challenges our traditional understandings of God, and it challenges our most comfortable and comforting understandings
Yes, it
of
can.
God. So that is it. And hope, of course, when you connect it with life, it never leaves you, and so it challenges me all the time. I'm now writing on something um, where I concentrate on what is happening these days, these ongoing struggles, almost revolutions across the world that will not end, and how people, especially young people, are not just being drawn into it, but are giving leadership in marvelous and innovative, and very courageous ways. Um, and I call that being centered, that those revolutions will be successful because they are finally centered on what I call the hopeful Sizwe. So Sizwe is a Zulu word for the people. So if the people, those who see what is wrong in the world, those who get upset with what is wrong in the world, and those who have the courage to stand up and commit themselves to do something about it, those are the embodiment of hope in the world. Um, and that's what I'm thinking about right now.
Yes. And then they're viewing, witnessing those people and being related to those people is certainly a inspiration for others.
Yes, of course, but you only understand it if you join those struggles. I mean, hope can also be sort of very shortly described as where do you see hope? I see hope in resistance. I see hope in the continuing people who do not get intimidated. I mean, one of the things that we hear every day, because it's true, is that people will say to you, but don't you know everything has changed. Things are not the same anymore. Everything is now totally overwhelming. We live in a globalized world. Power is globalized power. The globalized power in cultural hegemonies, in political hegemonies, in economic hegemonies, where uh, corporations in this country are now persons and receive, and into the measure that corporations are given personhood, persons
Yeah.
are losing their
Yeah.
personhood.
Exactly.
They are being commodified because the corporations just simply take. That is such an overwhelming thought that most people say there's very little I can do about that. And so it's no longer just the neighborhood struggle for an issue. Even the neighborhood issue has globalized connections. Um, the water that is poisoned in Flint has everything to do with global corporations that make money out of the poisoning of the water, make money, more correctly speaking, out of their carelessness, but about what happens to the people as long as money is being made. So people feel overwhelmed, and if you do that, then you think there is very little I can do about it. But if you keep connected with those people in those struggles, in these smaller places, and in the wider context, what the students are doing in the United States at the moment uh, is exactly what the students are doing in South Africa at the moment. Um, the Black Lives Matter movement has everything to do with the Injustice Must Fall movement in South Africa on every
Mm-hmm.
single campus.
That's interesting.
And it's very interesting to see
Yeah.
those connections. I spoke last year at a university and I talked about this hopeful Sizwe
Yes.
concept, and there was one of the professors who said to me, "I'm sorry, but I just don't see this.
Hmm.
Where do you see this hope? Because things are getting worse in South Africa. The promises are not being fulfilled. The great expectation that we have with the singularity of the leadership of a Nelson Mandela, all of that seems to have been disappearing."
Mm-hmm.
And she says, "Where do you see that?" And I looked around the room and I say to her, "Do you see all these young people here?
Mm-hmm.
What would all these young people, some from the university, many from the community, many from the townships, what would bring them on a Monday night to come and listen to me, this old voice from the struggle gone past? What is it that brings them here? And what is it that makes them engaged?" That, I say to her, is where I see the hope.
Mm-hmm.
Because they are saying to me, we've not given up. And we are taking the struggle forward. And so in the hopefulness of the courage of young people in
Yeah.
South Africa and in Palestine and in Baltimore and in Oakland, I see in their resistance, I see the hope that um, I know will change this world. I don't have that energy anymore
Mm-hmm.
that I used to have, but they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, and if I see and I listen to the way they speak, the clarity with which they understand the issues,
Hmm.
the disappointment
Mm-hmm.
and the anger that our generation have left them an incomplete struggle.
Yeah.
When we got our little bit of status and our little bit of power and our little bit of security, we thought, oh, it's all over.
Mm.
And it was not
Yeah.
all over. So, so they are saying we're not allowing that disappointment or those disappointments to disempower us.
Yeah.
We are being enabled by something that we continue to see, and we're inviting you to see it with us, to do it with us.
Mm.
Now, that to me is tremendously hopeful. That's where life is, and that's where change begins, and that's where transformation will be real. And that keeps me hopeful.
Well, I'm very happy that you took some time to be able to speak to the students. I know that you need to get going to another appointment there. Uh, but I want to give you an opportunity, if you have the time, for just one more question. If there's
Oh,
anything
absolutely.
that you think, anything that you might say to these are MDiv students who are going to be listening to this, that are, what might they, advice you might have to help them to, one, be inspired to have hope, to be hopeful, to do hope, but also how to inspire others as they become leaders of the Christian communities of faith.
Well, that's a more difficult question
Yeah.
than it may sound like. I mean, um, I found my own inspiration in in my faith, um, but that's only because my faith have been
Mm-hmm.
tested in so many ways that I couldn't, I almost couldn't keep up. And if you can't keep up, then you say to God, "Look, just go test somebody else. I'm done." And so, but when you do that, I mean, your hope walks out the door.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I found great inspiration in my faith and in the story of Jesus of Nazareth and the difference that that story makes to the story of humanity in the world. So that's the beginning. I also found great inspiration in simply what I saw that others were doing. That's why I keep on talking about get connected to the struggle of those people who are genuinely fighting to make this world a different world, a better world. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, um, I sometimes told people the story in those days, and I think it remains true, that there were times that I myself had given up. I just could not see. I make my analysis and I look at the situation and I think this is not going anywhere. Or you come to a point where we say this is all going to be a dead end. We'll die here. So I did not have the faith to go on,
Hmm.
but others did. So that reminded me of the story in the gospel
Yes.
of this man who was lame, paralyzed, and how his four friends brought him to Jesus, fought through the crowds, and finally got to the front door, thinking they couldn't go up. Then they had to go up on the roof, and they broke down the roof. That's a pretty thing to do. I mean, they did not stop, and even if they had to break down this person's roof, they would not stop until they could let that man
Hmm.
go down to, to Jesus and be seen by Jesus. Then Jesus says, their faith is what made the difference, not his faith. He'd already given up. He'd said, oh no, this is never going to happen. Just leave me alone. But they said, we won't
Mm-hmm.
give up until you are healed.
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes have that feeling.
Interesting.
That other people's courage, other people's joy, other people's insistence that this wrong in the world will be made right. That we can't make this world a perfect world, but we will not stop working at the imperfections of this world until we help to make it better. That is something that I think the students need to remember.
Yes.
But you can only have that kind of faith and that kind of hope and therefore that kind of joy if you are connected.
Yes.
So
yes. And love.
Yeah, I mean, so a circle of people who struggle, that's where hope is, that's where love is, that's where joy is. And if there is joy, there is also strength.
Mm.
And so when the Bible says the joy of the Lord is my strength, what is it that would make God happy?
Yeah.
It is in the joy of God in contrast to the woundedness of God that gives us strength. The woundedness of God gives us courage and pathos. The joy of God gives us strength. And that's when we can find that strength, like Jesus says, to endure until the end comes. And the end, if you do this, is sometimes the end that you can determine. And that's the great thing about being in a struggle. There is an end to the injustice, but you who struggle in justice and in power of love, you determine the end. It's not the powers outside who determine the end. And you determine how that end would be like. So it's just a marvelous thing. And if you can connect your study of your theology with the power of your faith, if you can connect the story of Jesus with the story of the people, God's people in the world, if you can connect the woundedness of God with the woundedness of the people in the world, then your theology may make a difference, then your preaching will make a difference, and then your witness will make a difference. And then all of a sudden this will not be dry, it will not be boring, it will not be leading into a ministry where you think, where in the hell am I going to if the church is dying? But it'll make you say, hey, I'm going to be connected with a community that makes sense to me because it is connected to what is happening and what God is doing in the world.
Amen. That's a wonderful place to end.
Great.
Because there's so much more we could say, but that's a very inspirational point to end, and nice and clear. And I hope the students will
Well, I hope
take
to.
that to heart, because I love the way you've woven together many of the themes that are in the class itself.
Right.
We're talking about faith, we're talking about love, we're talking about hope, we're talking about Christology, we're talking about pluralism, we're talking about injustice. So,
Wonderful.
so thank you very much.
It is a great pleasure.
All right, it's wonderful to see you.
Thanks, Ellie.
I hope you have a good rest of your